So yeah, I am a dad. I'm a dad. I am a dad of two little girls. I'm a girl dad through and through. So I wanted to submit something this year, but I'm like, I don't know what to submit. Like, I do podcasting and then I make it into wave audio streams and wave streams and stuff like that. So there's never like a visual to it or anything. It'd be really
How,
cool, but it's not my domain.
how old are your daughters?
My daughters are 6 and 2.5.
Okay. Well, the winning film this year at the elementary level was done by two sisters who were 8 and 5.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah,
and they
my older
use
one, she
their
loves to make
mobile.
videos and like she
So
likes
there
to make
you
cooking
go.
videos. She's all into it. Danos is a partner of the show, and a partner of the blog. So I was like, whenever I'm making like a cooking video or something, like she wants to be in on it, making it and stuff. Like she has an interest for it. It's really interesting. So next year I'll submit something. I'll
So
commit to that right now.
so so that's your video next year. It's going to be a cooking video. You can be assisting your daughter.
I like it. I'll remember that. I'll keep that. I'll submit something next year. I promise. But uh, Alan, first off, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, on the Young Dad podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. As you guys heard in the intro, a little bit about Alan, and tiny smidgen of what he does. But Alan, tell us about you, what you do, why you do it, how you got to where you are today, and just the long form answer. The long answer.
Okay. I love talking about all this stuff, so you're in for it.
I'm in for. I'm ready.
So why do I do what I do? So I have been a dad for 165 years.
Wait.
Okay, I know I look old, maybe not quite that old, but that is the total age of my three daughters, my
Okay.
three biological daughters. And the reason I like to think about it that way and say it that way is because, as you know, as a dad, your relationship and your various activities with your daughters are different. And
Mhm.
so each one has their own relationship with you. And
Mhm.
so that's the way I think about it. I'm also have 105 years of experience as a granddad. Whole other thing. Much easier, by the way, than being a dad. Much, much easier. Um, so part of the reason I do what I do is because I have experienced what I refer to as the zenith or the apex of daddying. And the apex of daddying is when nurturing your children is nourishing to you. So I'm an educator by background. I have taught all the way from graduate school up to nursery school, is the way I like to say it. I have been a teacher, a professor, and a principal. And in my job as an elementary school principal, I was interviewed by the pre kindergarten students who were 4 years old. And their question was, what do you do as principal? Um, I, I thinking they have no clue what a principal is. I said to them, I'm happy to tell you, but I'd love to know what you think I do. And this one little 4-year-old boy stroked his chin like he was a wizened old man. And he said, I think the principal is like the daddy of the school. And I told him that was the best definition of my job I ever had. So when I left my active in school work, which was 40 years ago, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I created what became the National Elementary School Center, which focused on three things, mainly the importance of the earliest school years. Two is the importance of people going outside their silos who are professionals who work with children. So I began as a special ed teacher and got used to speaking to psychologists, neurologists, social workers, etc. And when you're in regular education, that doesn't happen unless there's a problem. And I miss that. And so that was the second mission of the National Elementary School Center. And the third mission was to bring public and private school people together, acknowledging they were colleagues and not adversaries or competitors. And I did that for 10 years and then got really tired begging for money to keep the social profit 501c3 afloat. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And a friend said, well, I just spoke to your three daughters, and the way they speak about you as a dad, you need to write a book on fathering. What could be more flattering?
Right.
Lucky
Yeah.
she didn't speak to them when they were teenagers, and she waited till
Oof.
they were in their 20s. They might, and I didn't know how I would go about doing that. I'd written a lot in education, but nothing about um, being a dad. And so my first response to her was, fathering isn't a book, fathering's a paragraph. And she said, what do you mean? I said, fathering's a one-time biological act, requires zero commitment, just a shot of DNA. And that's not a book. And so I don't like to criticize things without coming up with an alternative. And so I coined the word daddying, which is where fatherhood and nurturing intersect. And daddying is a process, not an act, and it is a lifelong commitment. Um, so, how do I go about writing a book about that? Well, first I reference myself as a father, then as a son, then as a grandson, then as the daddy of the school. And I had the rudiments of a outline for a book. And I decided that I should speak to the consumers of daddying. So if daddying is a product and you want to improve a product, you talk to the consumers. So there, that would be children. And so I did 28 focus groups in 3 countries. It's about 30 years ago now that I started doing that. And the kids were as young as 5 and as old as 21. But they were like ages in the groups. And I thought at that point I had really an okay outline for a book. I got an agent, and she said, have you interviewed dads? And I said, no. And she said, why? I said, I guess it was so obvious it didn't occur to me. She said, that's cute, Alan. Now go do it. So I have now interviewed 205 dads, one-on-one, from 20 different countries, ranging in age from 16 to 104. And what comes out of those interviews, Jewel, is a soulful sadness. That's not all that comes out of it, plenty of positive, happy stuff. But
Hmm.
there is an overwhelming soulful sadness that comes out of those interviews. And
Take me
at
into
that
that.
point,
Take
I
me
had
into
a
that
decent,
world. Take us into that
okay,
soulful sadness, if you would. Just a little bit to kind of describe what that means, because you mentioned that was the overwhelming, kind of resounding outcome of those interviews. Uh, I'd be curious to know more about that.
okay. So it's important for me to say again, though, that there was plenty of happy stuff and
Of
positive
course.
stuff as well. But this whole sadness was kind of the overwhelming, um, overarching thing that came out of it. And how I describe that is I call it the bookends of daddy yearning. And the bookends are, one bookend is so many of the dads talked about how they wish their own father had been more involved in their lives. And the other bookend is wishing that they were more involved in their children's lives. So that's sort of the overarching
Okay.
sense of the sadness. And At that point, the agent started to shop around the book. This is now about 20 years ago, and it kept getting turned down. And the eight publishers she went to 20 years ago, before people started self-publishing, she got these comments from each of the publishers. Best book proposal we've ever seen. Perfect guy to write the book. But men don't buy books. Men don't read. No book on fatherhood has ever been a bestseller. So sorry. There is an irony here, Jay. The irony is that there was a bestseller, and it was written by Bill Cosby. It was at the height of his fame with his television program. I never got to speak to the marketing department that turned it down. I would have said I didn't expect dads to buy the book. I didn't expect men to buy the book at all. I expected women to buy the book and give it to men.
Yeah.
Wives, daughters, fiancés,
Which
mothers-in-law.
that is so interesting, because when I look at my analytics for this show, for our podcast, the Young Dad podcast, I am always continually shocked that we have about a 60-40 split of women to men. The engagements I get on social media, I get a lot of women that engage. Obviously, I get the crew of dad casters. Like, we all support each other. We all comment on each other's stuff. We all like it, share it, all that fun stuff. That's the natural stuff. But when I look at the analytics side of it between Apple and Spotify, the female listenership is so strong, but it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense by what you just said, because it's women sharing it, buying it for someone else, because women know the men in their lives are not just going to go and do it themselves. They're not going to go out of their way outside of, the small network of dadcasters and dadfluencers on social media and stuff. We're kind of the exception to that. Like, we'll go out of our way to find the new podcast, to find the book, to find the thing, to find the website, to find the information. Majority won't, unless it's given to them. Even today, like, for my age group and whatnot, it's like, I don't need that kind of thing. I don't need to do all that. But when I talk about my podcast at work to the women, I work with pretty much all women. I work in mental health and behavioral health. But when they hear about it, they're like, oh, I want to show my partner, my significant other, my husband, my boyfriend, like, they could use this. When I talked to Dawn Brody, amazing comedian, host of the Health podcast, had her on a while back. She's like, I can't wait to share. Like we ran across your podcast, and I wanted to share it with my young dad, with my husband. Like, I wanted him to listen to your show and stuff. Thus connecting her and I and whatnot. She's a great person. Dawn's hilarious. Her podcast. If you like history and you like a different spin on it, that's just fantastic. Highly recommend Dawn's show. Regardless, you're totally right. It's women that purchase these things for the men in their lives. Even with my book that I've now self-published, my picture book, it's geared towards dads. It's a baseball game with dad, to showcase, dads taking their kids to a baseball game. Who's buying it? Women. Women are buying it for then their husbands and the dads in their life to read to their kids that do that. You know what I mean? So it's that right there is how it's shaking out.
And I'd love to see a copy of your book too. And maybe you want to write one of our weekly daddying blogs, which come out usually on Thursday. So we had one come out earlier today,
I saw that.
actually.
I read it. I read it.
Yeah. What's interesting is that after the eighth publisher turned it down, having said exactly the same thing as the prior seven, I got rid of my agent because I felt she was no longer as excited about, shopping the book around. And I got
Mm-hmm.
myself into a large publisher in New York. And I got to speak to an editor. And I said to the editor, I know nothing about publishing. So I'm not sure what the process is, but here's the proposal. And she read it and within 24 hours, she called me back. She said, I love it. I'm going to send it up the line. And I said, well, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And she said, to the editor in chief.
Uh,
So again, very quickly, another 24 hours, she calls me back. The editor in chief loves it, and she's sending it up the line. I said, wait a minute, isn't the editor in chief the end of the line? And she said, no, marketing is the end of the line. And so I got exactly the same response. So clearly I was very, very discouraged at that point. But
yeah. So
I was also
how did you handle that? You know,
determined, to
you've been rejected 9 times, and you went through 8 times with an agent, thinking, okay, one of these is going to stick. That ninth time you do it on your own. Just that sentiment right there for you overcoming those obstacles, those barriers, the failure, all those things put in front of you. What was that like? Like, take us through that. What was like your family dynamic like? How did you handle all that? Like, just going through that.
well,
Like, how did it affect
it
you as a
was,
person?
yeah, excuse the word, but it was trumped by my determination to address the core issue of soulful sadness. And if it wasn't going
Mhm.
to be through a book, it was going to be by some other means. And I wasn't sure how. Obviously, I was sad. I was pissed off because if you say to somebody, best book proposal we've ever seen, perfect guy to write it, but so it was like, just tell me it's a terrible proposal and who the hell are you to write it? And then I can
Right.
deal with that on a different level. But don't give me all the positive feedback. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do, except I was determined to do something to address this hopeful sadness. And I ended up happened to see a movie called, which I actually referred to in today's blog, as you saw. It's called My Architect, the Son's Journey, and it's by
Mhm.
Nathaniel Kahn. In 2003, it was one of the three finalists for an Academy Award as Best Documentary. And basically, Nathaniel Kahn is the son of a very famous architect who I'd never heard of. His name is Louis Kahn, and he knew very little about his dad and decided, probably about 10 years after his dad had died, to find out about his father by looking at his architecture and interviewing people who had commissioned him to do buildings and to talk to other architects. And I found myself alone in this movie theater in Washington, D.C., um, crying, not through the whole thing, but through a lot of it. And I thought, boy, that really nailed you. Um, Gee, I kind of wish my dad had been watching this movie with me, because I could have talked about issues that came up in the movie, which were not all that dissimilar from some of the issues we had, which it would have been very difficult for me to broach out of nowhere. But if we had talked about what we had just seen together, we could have talked about the issues. So that was literally 20 years ago, 21 years ago. And I had the notion that I would use film that way to help dads and their kids deal with some of the issues that were there in their lives. Um, and around the same time, I was invited to talk to a group in New Mexico who ran a program called Firstborn, which was a program for in the rural areas of New Mexico, dealing with families who were having their first child and who really had limited knowledge about proper nutrition, medical care, and all sorts of other things. And I asked the people how many dads were in the home when the social worker came into the home to interact with the families. And the silence answered my question, which was
Mhm.
basically none.
Mhm.
And so they heard that I was doing some work with dads, and they said, do you ever come out to New Mexico? And I said, I do. My oldest daughter is a teacher in New Mexico, and I come out on a regular basis twice a year. to spend time with her and in her classroom. And they said, well, when you're here, could you meet with our staff and tell us what to do? And because you can tell I'm a really mean guy, my
Yeah,
answer was no.
100%.
Yeah. And they said, wait a minute, you sound like you're kind of nice. And I said, I am, but I don't tell people what to do. So I'll meet with your staff and we'll figure out what to do together. And so I did. And when I was done, the woman who had invited me said that you did the craziest stuff with my staff and it was really cool. You have any other crazy ideas? And so I said, well, I don't think my ideas are crazy. But how about a film festival? And she said, that's a great idea. And you have to do it here in Santa Fe because we're the city different. We're creative. You got to do it here. And so that again was about 20 years ago. And I had a colleague in New Mexico, a female colleague who was a documentary filmmaker. We had made two short films together on children prenatally exposed to drugs and alcohol. Um, that was a big issue 20 years ago. And I talked to Deborah and I said, you want to work with me on this? And she said, yes. I said, I have three requirements if we work together. The first is we have to have fun. The second is whatever we create, we have to feel really proud of. And the third is it needs to be exquisitely sensitive to the culture in which we're doing this. And since we've done two short films together, we know we can do the first two. We can have fun doing it and we can feel proud of what we do. I wonder how we begin to make it sensitive to the culture. I guess we start talking to people in the culture. Head
Hmm.
Start, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, some veterans groups, somebody in the prison system. And we posed the idea of a film festival and said, would you support it? And they said, yeah, but you know what, Alan? We're having a really difficult time getting fathers engaged in our work. So could you create something just for us? And again, mean as I am, the answer was no. We'll create something with you, but not for you. And so I was distracted for 15 years doing programs in the penitentiary with veterans group and Head Start centers and schools and law offices and the World Bank and places like that. And about 2.5 years ago, I thought, wait a minute, that film festival, that still was a good idea. Let's do it. And so last year, we launched the film festival, which was only virtual. I work with a group that actually knew something about doing children's film festivals. I knew zero. And we worked together and we received films from 17 different countries, which
Whoa.
blew me away from
Heck
kids
yeah. Yeah.
from 17 countries. Yeah. And, we talked at the very beginning about you doing, submitting a video, and the theme was totally open ended, do what you want. But
Hmm.
the theme was, the prompt was uh, just to a letter to my father or father figure. That was it. And the videos were to be 1 to 5 minutes long and they were in four different age groups: elementary school, middle school, high school, and undergraduate college. And then what we did is we did a training session for kids that same age group to how to judge a film, not to review, but how to judge a film. So when
Hmm.
the films came in, kids judged the films. And when they narrowed it down to 10 semifinalists in each age group, they were sent to people in the film industry. And people in the film industry narrowed the 10 down to 5, and they appeared online for a week for the public to vote. And each of the finalists earned $250. And the winner, um, received an additional $250 and not an Oscar, not a Golden Globe, not a Grammy. They received an Atticus, named after Atticus Finch, who
Hmm.
people believe is the best portrayal of a father figure or father figure in literature and the movies. And so they get an award, which is a mockingbird attached to a pedestal along with $500. So that was year one. That was last year around Father's Day. Um, we were inspired by what we saw, what we received, and we decided to expand it this year. And so, which was just completed at the end of June, and we did a live version in addition to the virtual version. This year we had films from 21 countries, and we opened it up to fathers to send in films or father figures, independent filmmakers, as well as kids. And so the forum, so it's the Daddying Film Festival and Forum. And the forum was a 1 day event. We did the same event in two different places in New Mexico, Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And the forum involved showing the winning films, and then having a discussion about the main points that came up in the film, the main issues that came up in the film. So it's a very different approach. We're not looking to do a traditional film festival where we can brag about showing 150 films over 12 days in 16 venues. That's not the concept. The concept is to use the film as a way to talk about issues that have to do with daddying, and to shine a spotlight on the importance of father involvement in its presence as well as in its absence. Um, and then at the end of the festival of the forum, we showed a full length movie that was submitted this year, which was quite wonderful. And then we end with having a professional photographer who will take a photograph of a father or father figure and his children or grandchildren. And you only get to take that photograph with you if you make a commitment as a father to a child or a child to a father. So we call it commitment photograph, a commitment portrait. So that's how we did it this year. We learned a lot. It's only year one of doing it. And next year it will be in Philadelphia, because part of our original idea was to move it from state to state so that we can shine a spotlight as well on the film industry in different states.
Hmm.
So next year we'll be in Philadelphia, which will be a lot easier for me since I live in Maryland and I can get to Philly in 2.5 hours by car. And we learned a lot, so we'll be doing some things differently than we did this year. But we're really, really, really excited about being invited to come to Pennsylvania, and by the impact it seems to have on people. Um,
Hmm.
so
That's incredible. I guess I'm going to Philly next year. Sounds like.
we'd love to have the ability here.
But that's
Where are
that
you
sounds
based, by
incredible.
the way?
I'm in Tri Cities in Washington, so I'm a bit further than a 2.5 hour drive. Um, but
Yes, you and
I've
it's
been to Philadelphia once. Uh, I've been there as a teenager. I think I was about 12, 11, 12, 13 years old, somewhere in that range. I don't remember exactly when. Uh, but I've been to Philadelphia. I've had a cheesesteak. I've been to like the Liberty Bell, all the touristy things that you do in the area when I was a kid. So I've seen a lot of that stuff. It's a really cool little area. Um, so I'm a big fan of Philly. Uh, but yeah,
good. So
heck,
your 6-year-old who will be 7 next year, that would be a great trip for her.
yeah, absolutely. And they fly well. We flew for the first time this summer. We flew from Washington down to Vegas. So I can handle taking both of them on a flight by myself. So big accomplishment there. So,
Yeah, of
but
course.
it's a lot of fun. But that sounds that's so cool. How it all started, how you ended up like, you admitted you got distracted for 15 years doing all these other things, helping all these other people, and then it was still there. It never died. Like the idea never died. The want, the desire doesn't just go away. And I feel like that's so important for dads to realize like the thing that you want to do or the dad that you want to be or whatever it is that you want to do, the passion that you have for that thing, it doesn't just die. It doesn't go away. Like you can try to put it on the back burner, but it's going to come back. It always is going to come back. Like for me, that's where I was. Like I had taken before starting this podcast, which has just barely hit a year of being published and out there. So we just barely hit our first year a couple days ago, actually. Um, like
Happy
I
anniversary.
thank you. I had just taken I'd taken about probably more or less a year plus off from like writing, blogging, recording. Like I had a sports podcast that was about 40 episodes deep. It was just or about 30 episodes deep. It was just starting to get going and it was just picking up traction and I like just it just fell off just because of life and everything. And this started to pick up. This idea was in the works between my brother and I for a few months. Like we just talking about it, and then one day it just finally hit me. I'm sitting at my desk I was working at a bank at the time, and it hit me sitting at my desk. I'm like, Young Dad podcast. Like that's it. Like that's the show. Like that's what we're gonna do. And all these ideas came flooding, and then we like changed the format. Probably just a few episodes, like a few guest episodes in. It's like we got to have more guests. We got to have more people. We got to change it from these segments which were fun. They were super fun. We used to do like drafts and things like that. Like they were really fun. But I was like, we got to change it to just more conversation, like these more lengthy like conversations, like in depth on these different topics and whatnot with our guests. And it totally changed just like how we do things. And it's totally just been the best breath of fresh air I could have ever hoped for. Being able to just like spread things like Daddying Film Festival or to talk to the guys from like As Dad as It Gets. Great show over there. Or to talk to,
Yeah.
an amazing mother and comedian like Dawn. To then talking to Aaron, the author of The Divorcee Dish, and being able to share these different perspectives, which is a lot of what you do as well, like sharing the perspectives of fatherhood, parenting, life in general. Like Eric, the peanut guy, Eric doesn't have any children, but him and his dad were really close, like very, very close, like incredibly close. And like being able to talk about the impact that his dad had on him like growing up and just that totally different perspective and how his dad influenced like the minor league baseball community here in the Tri-Cities, and some of those things have carried through to today through his like legacy, and like Eric's carried that legacy on like to today. And it's just like it's so incredible to be able to share those, the I guess what you would call or what we could call like the daddying movement, because like you mentioned at the beginning, the zenith or the apex of daddying is where fathering and parenting and fatherhood mate right there. The caregiving, the emotional, the social, the mental, that connection meet right there. It's just so important, and sharing that daddying movement to get it out there, because like you said, the fathering is just a one-stop shop, you know and it's very easy for men to one stop shop and bounce. And it's not cool to be a deadbeat. Don't be a deadbeat. I'm going to put that on a shirt that says, don't be a deadbeat. It's cool to be an involved dad. Involved dads are cool. A bunch of t shirts like that. But um, that daddying movement mixed with that zenith or the apex of it all, that's what it's about. That's what it's about. That's why the Dadding Film Festival exists. That's why this podcast exists. That's why all the other fatherhood and dadcasts exist, because we're on this movement to change the narrative around how cool it is to be a dad and how important it is to be an involved dad in your kids' lives. There's nothing more important to your children. And then to you as a man, to if you are in that situation and you're lucky enough and you're fortunate enough to be in that situation, even if you were just, it was a one-stop shop, find a way to be involved. Find a way to be involved if you're able to, because it's cool. And that's what we're working on, here on our show and just throughout this community that we have too. The dadding movement is cool. It's cool.
So let me jump in with two things. One is going back to a question you asked about, kind of what is some of the things that came out of these 205 interviews with
Yeah.
dads from 16 to 104 in 20 countries. So they're from 20 countries. I didn't travel to 20 countries, but they were from 20 different countries. Every socioeconomic, every ethnic, every religious uh, groups. So there were five things that stood out beyond sort of the overarching soulful sadness, which we spoke about earlier. The first thing is that when I asked the kids, if you could create the most excellent dad you could imagine, please tell me what he'd be like. What's most important? And I'll bet you can guess that the first thing that came up in every single group with the kids was being there. And when I said to the first group of kids, who were 14-year-old boys in New York City, what they said, but we mean really being there. And I said, what's the difference between being there and really being there? And they said, well, we'll give an example. So my dad comes home, this is 30 years ago, before cell phones and that kind of stuff, before the internet was really up and running. He said he comes home and he sees me doing my homework, sitting in front of the television set, and he takes out his newspaper and he sits next to me and he's watching television and he thinks he's being there. He's not. So that's the difference between being there and really being there. So you're not just sitting alongside your kid, but you're engaged. The second quality that came up was take us as seriously as we take ourselves. So you have a 6-year-old, so she's what, in first grade?
Going into first, yeah. Next year.
Going to the first grade. So you say
Yeah.
to her when she comes home from school, how was your day? And she says, so and so teased me.
Mm-hmm.
And one possible way of responding to that is teased you, so no big deal, shrug it off.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a boy, it's a man. It's no big deal. When you get to be my age, you'll know what a big deal really is. So that would be not taking your child seriously. But for your child at 6 years old, it's a giant issue. It's a giant issue. And so one needs to take what's going on with them seriously. The third quality that came up, I'm just giving the top five, is be a passionate advocate for us. Be a passionate advocate for us. And the fourth is show us you love us and be affectionate. So when I do my dadding interviews, if a dad is 50 or older, one of the questions I ask in every interview is, did your dad ever tell you he loved you? And for the older dads, the answer is usually no. Dads didn't say things like that in those days,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew he did. So the kids are telling me, be a passionate advocate for us, show us you love us, and be affectionate. So I think dads are more willing to say that now than they were then. And the fifth thing is provide us with security and protection. So that wouldn't be a big surprise. And then there were a whole bunch of other things, of course, that came up. But those are really the top five. And the being there is the single most important piece. So I like to say being a father is not just who you are, it's what you do.
100%. 100%. I don't think there's anything more important than being there, being present, and showing up. That's more than they say with work and stuff. When you go to work, half the battle is showing up. For being a dad, that's more than half the battle is showing up and being present. But it's
Yeah,
also about when you are a parent and when you are a dad and making the conscious effort to be there. Like, yes, you're going to be there at home when they get home, when you get home from work. You're going to be there, but really be there. School performances, sporting events, the big moments. Be there for all the big moments and not just the categorical big moments, but what's the big moment to them? What's the big thing to them right now?
exactly.
Because that's going to look different as they get older. What's important to them? What's the most important thing to them for you to be a part of? You're a part of their world. They're not a part of your world. You're a part of their world because you're only a part of their world for so long. I saw this.
So
This.
when I
Go
did
ahead.
an
Go ahead. Go ahead.
one of the dads that I interviewed was in Connecticut, and he said, I know I should be there more often for my child, but I work my ass off all week and I just don't have time to be there for her on the weekends. Like, I know I should, spend the day with her on Saturday and we should do an activity. And I looked at him and I said, um, part of the reason a lot of dads aren't present is because they answer like you just did, that you think you need to spend all day Saturday with your daughter, who was a young teenager at that point. And I said, I want to tell you something. Your daughter at age 14 doesn't want to spend all day Saturday with you.
Not at
Um,
all.
so how about if you just start a ritual where you have breakfast with her every Saturday, and either, she cooks one week, you cook, you go out the third week, whatever ritual, but you always have Saturday breakfast with her. And he looked at me and he said, "Is that all I have to do?" And I said, "I didn't say it was all you have to do, but if you make it so that it's so overwhelming for you that you do nothing because you can't spend all day with her, you're going to do nothing. And that's not helpful. So if you make it so, like with my three daughters who are about 2 to 3 years apart, I was the school principal when they were younger, is that I made it a point every night to read each one of them a separate bedtime story, separate. And I would alternate with who I would begin with because I knew that I was going to fall asleep while I was reading to one of them. And it was
Yeah.
like going to be the third one. So I alternated. I want to fall asleep. And I told them that many, many, many years later. This is actually very sweet. And I said, and they laughed. And I said, "Why are you laughing?" And they said, "Dad, you fell asleep every night reading to one of us, and we never said anything to you about it." I said, "You knew it? I thought you never saw me fall asleep. I thought, I kept reading even when I was dozing off." And they laughed and they said, "No, we knew it." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And they said, "Because we knew how important it was to you to read to us each night, and we didn't want to hurt your feelings." So the kids know. The kids get it, that even
hmm
though their dad was completely wiped out, that it was really important to do a nightly ritual with each of them, which included reading a story. So that's being there. So, during the week, that was it. That's all I could do. I didn't have the time to do more than that. Um, so
Yeah. No, that's so important. You have to make the time for what you can, and like you mentioned, that's the perfect way to put it. If it's so overwhelming that you're doing nothing, find somewhere to start. Find somewhere to start. As simple as it is. It could just be playing Uno with your kids. If that's all you can muster, that's all you can muster.
Yep.
That's You're giving 100% of the 10% you can. If you have a little bit more energy and
Yep.
a little bit more time, do that a little bit more time. Do what you can. It doesn't have to be all day. It doesn't have to be these big. It doesn't have to be big or fancy either, which I think is so important to understand for dads as well. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Like I see it in dads groups all the time on Facebook. I have no clue what to do with my kid. I don't know what to do with him. I don't know what to do with him. A, have you asked them what they want to do with you? No, you haven't. I guarantee it. B, are you trying to just go big or go home because you're trying to one up someone else? Are you trying to do more because you want to be seen in a better light? Why are you doing too much? Stop doing too much. You don't need to do all that. What do they want to do? Keep it simple, stupid. That's all you got to do. Kiss it. Keep it simple, stupid. Um, that's it. Once you do those two things, ask them what they want to do and keep it simple. I promise you that time is going to be more meaningful than if you're doing that big thing that you already don't have time and energy for, because you're not going to be into it. It's not going to be fun for you. It's not going to be fun for them, and it's not going to be meaningful. Well intentions are great. Your intentions are great. You're right there, but do what you can with the energy and the time that you have available, and keep it simple. Because kids are simple creatures. At the end of the day, they don't need big. They don't need fancy. Like that's okay. But then if you're always going big and fancy, they're always going to expect big and fancy. If it's small, like you said, breakfast, simple, easy, and it's a concrete time that your daughter and like that she's gonna have dad time and that you're gonna have time with her. That she knows that that time is for her to sit down, talk, and spend time with you. She knows that's her space. She knows that's her time. Carve those times out to where they know that they can talk to you, open up to you, and just be with you uninterrupted. And that's so important today in 2023 more than ever. Uninterrupted. Put the phone down. Put the phone down. You don't need it. You don't need it. Keep it in your pocket. If it's urgent, then it's urgent. That's one thing. But if it's not and you don't need to, put the phone down. Be there, 100% there, mentally, emotionally, physically. Be there.
So, one of the things that I was thinking about yesterday, one of the groups I did with dads was at a nursery school, which I did for a couple of years, actually. So once a month we met. Um, and I don't want to take the time to go into the details, but how we did it. But dads would bring their kids to school that once a month to nursery school. We would have a little breakfast together, the dads and the kids. Then the dads and kids would watch a very short video based on a good children's story, which the kids had read or had read to them in nursery school. And then they would do a very short activity together. And then the kids would go to their classrooms and the dads would stay for about 40 minutes. And we would talk about what was in that story that we had seen together. And I did it for a couple of years with them. And it was a wonderful thing for me and obviously for them and for the school. And the whole notion was to get dads beginning at the nursery school level, used to coming to school. It wasn't just something that mommies did, number one. And B, being an educator myself, I wanted the faculty to get used to seeing dads in school and not be intimidated when a dad came into the building, which was often my experience what the case was. But one time we were talking about was just before the Christmas holiday. And I said to the dads, I brought you each a gift. And the gift is to remind you of what your children want. And they kind of looked at me like, you're giving us a gift? And I gave them each a small mirror. And I said, that's the gift, is you're to look at this and you will know exactly what your kid wants and what your kid needs. You, right? You don't need to do a big dramatic thing. And in other interviews that I've done with dads and with kids is I ask them, when they have a traditional winter holiday, whatever they celebrate, what do you remember most? If I ask dads, what do you remember most as a child about that holiday? Whatever it is, whatever they're celebrating. And it usually, the answer has to do with smells, feelings, ritual. And I say, do you remember any gifts you got? And usually that's only if I push them to really think about it. So it's not the gift. The gift is
Mm-hmm.
you. It's the gift of time. So,
True.
when you ask a kid, if you say, how does the kid spell love? The answer is Time. That's how they spell love. So
Very true. 100% true. Well, Alan, as per usual on the Young Dad podcast, we ask all our guests for their parting wisdom for the dads that are out there struggling, that are having a hard time, that just can't seem to, break out of what they're going through and they're just struggling. What are you saying to the struggling dad? What's your like all encompassing parting wisdom?
I think really it is to say you can become the dad you want to be. And it's not as intimidating or as difficult as you often make it in your mind. But in order to become that dad that you want to be, you need to have a concept in your mind of who is that dad? What does he look like? And I don't mean physically.
Mhm.
What are the qualities? What is the characteristics? So the advice would really be think, to think about it. And you can use yourself as a frame of reference. What was important to you? And if you weren't lucky enough to have a positively involved dad in your life, you can think about what I call a patchwork dad, which is who in your life played a role and had qualities that you really admired. It might have been a teacher, it might have been a coach, it might have been a pastor, it might have been, and it could be female as well as male, of course. But what are those qualities? So get a concept, think about it in your mind. Who is the dad? What is the most important thing that I remember or that I wish had happened for me? And then you start working on it from there. But have what I call a lodestar, a daddying lodestar, which is what is that one thing that you will use to navigate how you go about your journey as a dad. And it is a journey, a wonderful journey.
Very wonderful journey indeed. Well, Alan, thank you again for joining me today. It's been a true pleasure hearing just all the wisdom that you gave, not only to myself, but to our listeners, to our audience. And it's been a true pleasure being able to speak with you and get to know you a little bit. And again, just thank you for your time. It's much appreciated.
Well, and thank you for doing what you do. When I wrote in 2008 about the daddying movement, one of the things I talked about was that it's self perpetuating. And in 2008, there were no podcasts, and there weren't all that many daddying groups. Now there are too many for me to keep up with. And the podcasts that exist, are another indication of the daddying movement. So is it happening fast enough? Nothing ever happens fast enough for me. But it's happening at a rate that it needs to happen so that there are people
Agreed.
like you doing what you're doing, encouraging people to talk about their feelings is just wonderful. So congratulations at your first anniversary and keep
Thank
up
you.
the good work and daddy on.
We'll do 100%. Well, Alan, thank you again. It's appreciated. Audience, clap us out.
Okay.
Maybe. Come on, audience.
And I'm looking forward I'm looking forward to